New satellite images suggest that China may be expanding its so-called re-education camps in the Xinjiang province. Uighur Muslims and other minorities are being held at these camps. Detainees have reportedly been subject to religious restrictions, constant surveillance, and various human rights abuses. Since 2017, some 380 suspected detention sites have been newly built or significantly expanded in the province. That's according to satellite data collected by the Australian Strategic Policy Institute. New York Times reporter Chris Buckley has been looking into that data, and he joins us now from Sydney, Australia. Chris, thank you for being with us. So Chinese officials had claimed that they were scaling back on these camps in Xinjiang. How exactly did researchers discover that China was actually expanding these detention sites?
Well, the researchers at the Australian Strategic Policy Institute, like a number of other researchers across the world, have been using satellite imagery to try to determine just how many detention sites the Chinese government is maintaining in Xinjiang region, where they are, what their size is, and how many inmates they may be holding. So in this case, the researchers began by looking at night imagery of the region and figuring out whether there were new clusters of lights that indicated there may be detention sites. And from that, they determined this total of about 300 detention sites of different sites across the region.
Well, China also claimed that some of their inmates had so-called, and this is the translation of what they had said, graduated. But what did your investigation, or what did the investigation actually find?
Right. So particularly since last year, when the Chinese government came under increasing international pressure over the detentions in Xinjiang, the government there has emphasized that the number of people being held in these sites, which the government calls vocational training schools, has been going down. Now, what the evidence from the latest report from the Australian Strategic Policy Institute and from other sources indicate is that the number of people being held in detention in Xinjiang continues to remain very high. Now, what that evidence also suggests is that a number of these people are now being channeled into newly built high security facilities that look very much like prisons. You wouldn't be able to say 100% for sure whether these sites are prisons without being able to visit them directly, but it does look like what we're seeing now is that a significant fraction of the inmates from these re-education camps are now being convicted by courts and sent to prisons.
Obviously, China has not been forthcoming about these camps. I'm wondering what you can tell us about the conditions inside, how long people are usually kept there, and where do they go when they're released? Do we know that information?
Right. When it comes to conditions inside, it's been very difficult for anybody to get unfettered access to these camps, of course. The government has staged these visits for diplomats and some journalists, but they're highly choreographed exercises. What we do know is that what is happening to the inmates inside is that they're being separated from their families for very long periods. It can be many months, it can be a year, it can be even longer. And during that time, they're subjected to these classes in which they're expected to renounce Islamic religion, or at least deep devotion to Islam. They're also expected to demonstrate their devotion to Communist Party policies. A number of inmates who have left China have said that conditions inside can be extremely harsh, even brutal, and they've described beating by guards, for example. They've described very dirty or harsh physical conditions as well. The government, of course, the Chinese government denies those accusations, but it also keeps denying people, journalists and diplomats, unfettered access to these camps.
Well, the Chinese Communist Party also had a meeting about Xinjiang last week. What more can you tell us about that?
Right. This meeting happened last weekend, Lana, and it was presided over by the Chinese President Xi Jinping. This was a meeting to set the general direction of policy for Xinjiang for the next few years. The last such meeting was in 2014, and that 2014 meeting was very important in sort of laying the groundwork for the much more aggressive, much harsher policies we've seen in Xinjiang since then. Now, we're still trying to figure out what this latest meeting will mean for policy in Xinjiang region. I think to judge from the rhetoric that was in Xi Jinping's reported speech from the meeting, we can see that there's going to be continued drive to try to assimilate Uyghurs and other largely Muslim minorities in Xinjiang into what is called a wider Chinese nationhood. So I think what we can say is that these efforts to indoctrinate Uyghurs, to ensure that they consider themselves to be loyal Chinese citizens, those efforts are going to continue, possibly in new ways.
All right, Chris Buckley, thank you.
Thank you.